kind of a common term for, well, think more of the liver as the body's alchemist, okay? Because what the liver does is it converts things, as Dr. Navazio pointed out, it takes lactate, converts it back to glucose, and even converts it further into glycogen. Well, what it does with sugar is, and fructose, is it takes those elements and turns them into triglycerides and VLDLs. So when people talk about, and this has been something, it's called de novo lipogenesis, and it was pretty well defined and there's pretty well accepted in the research community now that that's what's driving the VLDLs and the LDL production in cholesterol issues and high triglycerides. Because your body has so much sugar that it has to do something with it immediately. So the liver grabs it and converts it into triglycerides and VLDLs. Another thing that it does is, but it also shuts down your body's ability to metabolize fat. And at the site of adipose tissue, which is your fat tissue, it is the passport to help facilitate the entrance of triglycerides and other fatty acids and be deposited as fat tissue, and inhibits the release of free fatty acids back into circulation to be used as energy. And this is why you see people, when you look at the overweight category, why people who are literally morbidly obese are literally starving, because the insulin clears their body of excess blood sugar, but because their fasting insulin is so high, it prevents their body from metabolizing any fat, so they're hungry again. And so this is the way we want to shift your metabolism towards burning more fat. So you can go ahead and turn that off now, Bruce. So what we've learned is by reducing the concentrated carb load in your daily diet and bringing down that glycemic load, bringing down the insulin, which takes about 2 or 3 weeks, what will happen is your insulin levels come down, the hormones, enzymes, including things like testosterone, come up in terms of their relative balance, and then you start to metabolize a lot more fat. Now, when we take this further, and you get yourself into what we call nutritional ketosis, this is where it gets really interesting. You can go to Dr. presentation. You get yourself into nutritional ketosis by getting your carbs way down, and then what happens then is the liver switches from taking the excess sugar and converting it into fat, and then taking the fats and converting it into glucose and ketone bodies. And that's gluconeogenesis, as Dr. Navazio pointed out. And with proper nutritional ketosis, your body increases your ketone body production by 10 or 15-fold, and then all of a sudden you become virtually bomb-proof. Okay? And your body's able to metabolize fat for aerobic muscle activity, and it's better at your brain function, and you become more stable mentally. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the product Vespa seems to shift that, encourage that. Now, the other thing that happens when you get your insulin sensitivity up and all that is this is where the carbohydrates come back in. Is what we found is once you're insulin sensitive, you can bring concentrated sources of carbohydrates in before races or long efforts, and certainly during efforts, though you won't need nearly as much because you're burning a bigger fat burning base. So because there's a go ahead, Bruce, next one. We'll talk more about gut pain and overtraining. Will I go off?
Yeah, we have about 30 seconds.
So there's been some good papers published on what they call insulin muting. When you're insulin sensitive and you're exercising, when you do take in carbs, your body takes them without triggering an insulin response or a large one. And so you don't turn off that fat mechanism at the same time you're introducing the carbs and sugars into your system. So you stay, you're able to sustain that high level crossover point where you're burning more carbs because you're bringing in a sustainable amount of carbohydrates because you're burning off that high fat burning base. Okay, go ahead, Bruce. We're going to look at some science here. Go ahead. This is more the drier science. Okay, so these are all talking about why the studies have made sports nutrition very carbohydrate centric. Go ahead. And this is why, this is why the ketosis thing has never really caught on, and people say when they go, they feel lousy and all that, because this has got to be done properly, because when you don't do it properly, it doesn't get results. And if you don't do it properly, mixing saturated fats, having a high-fat diet with protein, with carbs, is a bad thing. Bad things are going to happen when you mix a lot of carbs, a lot of fats, and all that into it. But the body, when you get into nutritional ketosis, your body makes a fundamental shift to burning fat as your primary fuel, and the interesting thing is saturated fats become the preferred fuel. Go ahead. Go ahead, next one. So this is all well documented. So those first couple of days when you go off the carbs, you have this high insulin level, so you're not accessing your fat, and you're trying to get on your burned fat, so you burn fat when you can't access it, and you're off the carbs, so all of a sudden you feel lousy. You can't do a thing. Go ahead, next. But as they say, after a few days it passes. And this is the Stephenson study that was done at Harvard, because he was ridiculed. And so he go ahead, next slide. So he locked himself into Bellevue for a year and ate a high-fat, moderate protein, low-carb diet. And because they said that's not healthy, couldn't be done. And actually, the examination they did before him, they saw some gingivitis, which after a week of being on the high-fat, moderate protein diet, cleared up. Go ahead. And I'll talk about that. Okay, this is where, when you hear the things in the news about low-carbohydrate diets and how they don't work or whatever, the definition of low-carb diet amongst practitioners can vary from, my friend Ling Ru told me of a friend where a doctor had a low-carb diet which restricted her to 48 grams of carbs per meal, which is hardly low-carb. Most sedentary people have to be on 50 grams of carbs or less. If you're an athlete, you can use quite a bit more. But the key to a ketogenic, low-carb diet and getting results is to induce ketosis. And like I said, every one of you guys is an individual, and everybody has different carbohydrate tolerances. So what's going to induce nutritional ketosis in you is going to be very different from what it'll do in you. Different stages, there's all kinds of variables, and they're all over the map. So it's sort of a very individual thing, but you have to get your carbs down to where you induce this ketosis, where your body just goes for fat, you're producing ketone bodies, so you're not triggering the hunger mechanism of low blood sugar. Go ahead. Okay, and this is an important distinction, because you'll hear from people how dangerous being in ketosis is, because interestingly enough, what controls ketosis is insulin again. Because if you're not producing insulin, you'll have a run, and you go into ketosis, you'll get ketoacidosis, which, just like too much glucose, will kill you. It's just two ends of the spectrum. Go ahead. Made from the liver, provide alternative blood sugar to fuel. These are the common myths. Go to the next one. So here's some studies, because I'm looking at the science. I want to back up what I say with the science. I'm not getting this stuff out. So you see here, 6 subjects were locked up for 7 weeks. You can see this baseline, 1 week, 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, each individual's weight loss is compensated by a backpack. Go to the next one. So their endurance went up, but their weight went down. Given 90, so they compensated, Jamie, even though their weight went down, they had to compensate them with extra weight. They put the weight back on in a backpack, and they still had better endurance. So time to exhaustion, 6 weeks. So here's the thing for you guys as cyclists. This is the baseline on a normal carbohydrate base load. This is the 1 week, and this is why you have to be willing to drink the Kool-Aid, because there's that transition time, okay, where your performance will go down, and your body's going to say, I need my carbohydrates. Okay, but after 6 weeks, you recover to full endurance performance, and actually better than this one. Next slide. Okay, this is a study done in 1983, and by Dr. Finney, who he is related to the other Finneys, but so they went from a full high carb. These were cyclists who were racing, high level cyclists, and they studied them with a high carb diet, and then did a proper transition to a ketogenic diet. Now these aren't using an OFM thing, so they're not adding Vespa or carbohydrates back in once they're in ketosis. So go ahead, next slide. So here you see everything stays relatively the same. Now the interesting thing is, even though they don't put in as much muscle glycogen, post is pretty much the same. They're actually using 1/4 the glycogen. So the glycogen sparing is what goes up. And this is why, like what I'm seeing right now is when you add a little carbohydrates back in strategically, it's a very powerful tool. So you're seeing that basically high carb, low carb, a ketogenic diet, you're getting pretty much the same performance. Now, when you add, and so what we're seeing is when you add some carbohydrates back in strategically and use the Vespa, you're getting an even better performance level. Go ahead, next. Composition. Okay, this is interesting because this is the new cutting edge stuff which is coming out with cell membrane.